My name is Lorenzo Semple, Jr., and before I go any further, let me say that a thing like this should start with a strong mea culpa. I say mea culpa for the lies I'm about to tell, for the things I forget, for the things that I misinterpreted and will continue to misinterpret, and for the people that I trash, most of whom deserve it. My background, in the sense that it had anything to do with becoming a writer. I was born in Mount Kisco, New York, a wealthy suburb in Westchester, and my parents were business people, but they were very closely associated with the New York theater. My uncle by marriage was Philip Barry, the playwright, and we knew a lot of people in the theater I grew up with, New York theater. And went to school at private school, day school in Mount Kisco, then later on to Brooks School in Massachusetts, a boarding school. I went to Yale, and before we got into the war, I left just in the end of 1941 to drive an ambulance with the Free French in the Middle East, just really for adventure. Although my father said afterwards it was to get away from my tailor bills that I left behind me at Yale. But anyway, so I did that. And after a year there, very eventful year there, came back, was drafted in the U.S. Army, went back to Europe, and went through the war in Europe, and then came back. Anyway, and that was my childhood.
You were there for the whole time? For
Yes.
the whole war in Europe?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then I came back, and I decided I wanted to be a writer. For the sole purpose, I thought it beat work. I had no interest in saying anything, ever. I still don't. My uncle, as I say, was a very successful playwright. They had places in Florida, on the Riviera, New York, and that seemed to be the way to live if you could do it. I did not want a job. I've never had a job, and I wouldn't consider taking a job. And so I felt that writing was, the best thing, and I had a knack for it. I sold a couple of magazine stories when I was still in at Columbia. After the war, I finished up at Columbia. I didn't want to go back to Yale. And so I sold a couple of stories, like in the Saturday Evening Post and Woman's Home Companion and things, which were pretty big things in those days. And so I just went on from there. And that was basically my introduction to writing. But as to general things for young people, of course, the first thing is don't go into writing. I mean, that's the most important thing, but they hear that everywhere. Don't even think of it, especially anything to do with the movies. It's an abominable business these days. It always has been, but it's now beneath contempt. I say now, literally, if Fox called me up tomorrow and said, any script you write, we will greenlight, I'd say, no, thank you. I cannot stand meetings. It is so collaborative in the sense you have to meet with people so often, talk to them. And again, perhaps I shouldn't start out saying this, but I have a relatively low opinion of screenwriting in general. I do not consider it compares with novels for serious things. It's a knack. It's an art. It's a craft more than an art, and of no importance whatsoever in the literary field. I also happen to think that movies do not make anything happen. I agree with Auden, the poet, who he said poetry makes nothing happen, and movies don't really make anything happen. Maybe they preach to the converted. I've never heard of a movie that actually changed anybody's mind about anything. It reinforces what they think, and so that's all right. But it's a tricky, interesting craft, writing scripts. The point is to manipulate the audience. Being manipulative is a word that's often used badly, I mean, as a pejorative. But to manipulate an audience is exactly what you're trying to do. And the great French playwright Henri Montholon, in a preface to one of his plays, he wrote that to him it was like a bullfight. The audience was like a bull that came charging out into the light, confused, lost. Your job was to torment him, drive him around in circles, make him follow, as he said, make him follow a story, characters they detested in a story they didn't believe, to an end that they rejected, and then you kill them. And that, to me, is actually, that's what you're trying to do. That's what a movie writer should be trying to do. And I also would like to dispel the cliches that come with movie writing. One of them is, that I've often heard, unfortunately, from members of this guild, oh, the writer's the only one who faces the agony of the blank page. That's one of the favorite things. Well, actually, that's the happiest moment in the world when you face a blank page. It could turn out to be a great script. It'll go down steadily from the blank page, you can be sure. And it's a great privilege to be able to face a blank page. And anyway, the other things will come up as we go along. But that was my, that was my basic basic attitude towards it. I mean, I never looked on screenwriting, to be honest. I just thought it was a terrific knack if you could do it, trick if you could do it. And I had 2 plays on Broadway also, incidentally, before that. They were not successes, but they were not desperate flops either. They both lost all their money, but they had respectable reviews and short runs. And so I thought from then I would be easily hired as a writer in Hollywood. It turned out not to be so. This was just the end of the studio system. If I'd been 5 years earlier, I would have automatically had a junior writer contract and everything. But this was the end of that, and so I just stopped. So I found myself, having to scramble around and writing some television. And again, I wrote some episodic television. I remember one of the high points of my life, I think, was when there was a show called Burke's Law that Aaron Spelling produced. And I went in. There was no staff writing in those days. There was a story editor and all freelance. And I went in. I got an appointment there somehow, and I could give them an idea. And I wrote a story, a script they liked. And when I was driving home, or driving a couple of days later, when I was home, I got a call from Aaron Spelling, calling from his car, which in those days was really incredible. People there were no cell phones, it was just very elaborate phones. And that to me was just say, Lorenzo, you did a really good job. We'd like to have you back. And that to me was one of the high points of my life. I mean, needless to say, God forfend that I wanted to keep writing Burke's Law, but it was very encouraging. And encouragement is the chief thing that you can give a writer if he's any good. I taught screenwriting at NYU in the Tisch School of Dramatic Arts. And I've quickly discovered there's absolutely no point in spending any time at all on people who are bad writers. You cannot make them any better. You can encourage good writers. And I had a lot of things I used to say, which sound brutal, but they loved it. I mean, I say this script is a DNR. Do not resuscitate. Nothing you do will make this script anything except rotten. And I'm not going to waste my time or yours talking about it. So take whatever talent you have and start something else. And they like that. Because you don't want to waste your time. It's too boring for everybody concerned, among other things. You can tell right away I can tell, excuse me, but I'm very arrogant that way. I can tell if a script's ever going to be any good. And generally the answer is most of them are never going to be any good. And so I say I was unorthodox in the way that I did things. But I had 2 plays on Broadway. One of them my agent had sold to MGM for $100,000, which was a huge amount of money in those days. Still is. But like 40 years ago, it was, unimaginable. And so I went with a family, with my wife and 2 small kids, went to Spain, which was cheap to live and fun, to write another play. And I didn't get anything done on the play. And one day I got a call, a cable from Bill Dozier, producer, with whom I'd written several pilots that we didn't sell, half-hour pilots. And he said, come up and meet me in Madrid. You have to come up and meet me at the Ritz in Madrid. So I flew up from Torremolinos, where we were living in the south of Spain. And Bill was there, met him there in the garden of the Ritz. And I have to go back one bit of history. One of the things I'd written, a pilot with Bill, was a pilot for ABC called Number One Son, about Charlie Chan's son, the great detective, the great Chinese detective in San Francisco. And his number one son was he was sort of a comic character, and his foil and his assistant. It was like Batman and Robin, actually. And so they liked it. ABC liked it. And then they called Bill one morning and said, we have one unfortunate thing. They've decided we will not do anything with an ethnic character in it. The network will not do anything with an ethnic character, which sort of fixed, that was the end of. And they said, we're very sorry. We apologize. We owe you guys one. So then nothing was heard for 2-3 years. Then when I got up to, Bill said, ABC is called with something unbelievable. He was so embarrassed and ashamed. Then in other words, he pulled out of his pocket a copy of Batman, the comic book. And he said, you can't believe it. This is what they want us to do. I certainly was no way a comic book fan. I never was and am not, in the serious sense, the way that some of these people take it insane. Later on, I guess I'll jump ahead for one thing. in a big comic magazine, a serious one. And there are such things, incredibly. The cover title was Lorenzo Semple Jr.'s Hate Mail. I was hated for the fact that I'd taken Batman and make light of it, and that I treated the whole thing like nonsense. But anyway, when Bill produced the copy of Batman, I said, "Say no more. I know how to do it. No discussion. I'll write it. Go back to L.A." But he did. We didn't discuss it any further. And in those days, it was unbelievable television worked that way.
Yeah.
No discussion. He went back. I wrote it. The pilot was shot without changing a comma. I wrote this thing. They didn't know quite what to make of it at ABC, but they wanted it. I flew once to New York with Bill, yes, to meet them one meeting after they had the script. And they said, "What is it?" We said, it's what it is. And they said, "Okay, we're going to shoot it." And with the help of very good direction by my friend Bob Butler, very well directed, and also very incredibly good casting by Bill Dozier and Bob and the people that were there. I had nothing to do with that thing. All I did was write it, send it, and they shot it. And it was an immediate success as a crazy, it was a big overnight success, stunning. It was a two-parter. It was on Wednesday and Thursday nights on ABC. There were nights where it was #1 and #2 in the ratings for the week. But I stayed in Spain, and I worked as executive story editor from Spain. We didn't even have a telephone. I mean, it's unimaginable to present-day television. There were never any notes, anything. People sent scripts by ordinary mail. There certainly was no beyond that. I mean, just by airmail. Nothing more than that. I rewrote them, I polished them, and sent them back, and they made them. And that was the way the series was made, which, again, is astounding if anybody contemplates going into television today. Never had a note, never had one meeting with a network or anything after that one meeting with ABC. We made a Batman movie with Adam West and all the characters. And the villains, all the people, Burgess Meredith and the rest of them. And the movie was, actually, I love the movie. I think one of the best things. I think Batman in general was much the best thing I ever wrote, incidentally. Much more, much better. Extremely witty, genuinely witty on 2 levels. Very sophisticated humor for those who got it. And kids liked it too, for the stupid way, fights and all that stuff. But it was very good. And the movie was actually, I think, exceptionally good too. But nobody saw it, because they thought, among other things, Fox didn't promote it particularly. They didn't know in those days what a franchise was. And in those days, some people were making movies by pasting together episodes of television. Like there was a movie of The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which was a television series. And they just took some episodes and put them together. And people didn't realize this was all an original movie. But anyway, so I wrote the movie at Fox. And I wrote the movie, so I was very fast in those days. I mean, I wrote the movie maybe in 10 days or 2 weeks. And again, nothing was changed. And so they wanted to hire me to do something else, chiefly because I was so fast and, cheap. So they hired me to do, there was a European series called Modesty Blaise, which was very successful. This was a European television and movie. And it was about sort of a female James Bond, a very sexy thing. They wanted to do a version of it. So they hired me to write one. And they bought a novel, again, a deliciously cheesy novel about this type of person called Fathom. The book was called Fathom. And because the girl was 6 feet tall, which is a fathom for those of you who are not nautical. And they got Raquel Welch to play it. And she was a skydiver. I mean, the whole thing was insane. And I put a script together with the producer. There was a producer at Fox who they owed a picture to. And so they said, Lorenzo, Joe, I'll call him Joe. He was a very nice guy and became a very good friend of mine. You and Joe will work together. But remember, we hired you to write it. And so anyway, you're the writer. You're in charge. So anyway, so I met with Joe. And I'd written 10 pages. It's easy to write 10 pages of anything. I wrote a super 10 pages. And Joe said, well, this is very good. What happens next? I said, I haven't a clue. I haven't the slightest idea. And he said, again, I was new and easily intimidated. I didn't know anything. I felt, you know, in awe of being on a Fox lot and everything. He said, okay, we'll start from scratch and write it together. And it was ridiculous because we'd sit there. I would say a line, or Joe would say a line, and I'd say, no human being would ever say that. So I'd say a line, and Joe would say, come on, you can't believe it, somebody would say that. And so we hammered out a script with the greatest difficulty, finally compromising on every line. And it was to be shot in Spain. And it was shot in Spain. But Raquel Welch has always disavowed the movie practically from her filmography, which I don't blame her. She got on badly with the director, who was not a brilliant director for this kind of movie. And so anyway, so the movie came out, and it was not good. But that was my first non-Batman movie. And then there were a couple of other things that fizzled out, as they do. And then, as I say, then I got into what I considered my important movies, in the sense. But as I say, they never. They all had enormous bumps in them, and bumps in the road, which I will describe because that's actually what people like to hear. As a bit of background, I should say that television was looked down on unbelievably in those days, and it was considered, again, like writing for junk trash magazines, for pulp magazines. And so to the point, everybody who was dumb, like me, wanted to get out of television as soon as possible. I mean, there was enormously more money to be made in television and everything, but nobody dreamed of it at that time. And so the idea was to get out of television as soon as possible in the movies. Right. And there was no hesitation about that. As I say, Batman was a lot of fun, but already when I got to doing a couple of other things, I had to have meetings and talk to people. It wasn't any fun. It wasn't really fun. I mean, it's always fun doing something, having people pat you on the head and say, gee, well done, great script. That is always fun. That's the chief thing about writing, to be. I think that's why people write, is to be patted on the head. Another writer, a very good writer who I know, calls it an unpunishable aggression against society. In other words, you can attack society, but you can't be punished for it. And that, to me, is what writing is actually probably deep down about. But the idea was to get out of television. And I was lucky, as I say, that I had an extremely good agent. Everett Ziegler, now dead, was probably the best agent that ever was there. And he had me handle Bill Goldman and Sidney Pollack and people, only the best of the best. And he liked me. I knew him socially, and we were friends. And he got me inside double day books. Ziggy was close to them, and they had an idea of doing a number of selling some books that hadn't sold, of packaging them, trying to make movies out of them, detective stories, just not important novels. And one of the first ones they gave Ziggy was called 6 Days of the Condor. And so I wrote a spec script on it. We cut it down to 3 days of the Condor because there wasn't that much to happen. There wasn't enough for 6 days. Well, in reviews that came, my subsequent people made a lot of that. How come they cut this down to 3 days? Because there wasn't enough. And it got made. And Peter Yates was going to direct it. And then, again, this is just stories out of school, but this is what Sidney Pollack, rest in peace. He and Redford had nothing to do at the moment. They were a team. And they were waiting for Bill Goldman to finish the script. And so my script was given to them. Or Ziggy gave it to them. And said, why don't you do this in the meantime while you were waiting? And they said, oh, gee, that's a nice idea. They liked the script. Redford liked it. Sidney liked it. And so the first thing they did was, they fired Peter Yates, because now Sidney was going to take it over with good reason. And then as soon as we started meeting on it, I didn't really agree very much with a lot of ideas that Sidney had. And so I was fired, which I didn't mind. I never, almost all the good scripts I've been involved in, I've been fired off of. And for one reason or another. Because I'm really not that enthusiastic about movies in general. I like writing a great deal. I like writing the script, but when it got arguing with directors and talking to people, I rapidly lost interest. And I think the changes on CONDOR, he brought Redford. There's a writer called David Rayfield, who's still around and a wonderful writer. And I never met at this stage. I think I met him once since. And he was Redford's regular writer. Redford always brought him in to polish up the dialogue and everything. And he was coming in inevitably. I didn't know that at the time. But when I didn't get on totally with the ideas, the changes that Sidney wanted to make, and Redford, because they were obviously, speaking, Sidney was speaking for him. I just I didn't work hard enough to satisfy Sidney, and he thought I was written out, so I was fired. And as I say, the movie was greatly improved by what David did, especially Faye Dunaway's part. And it worked out very well. I had no interest in credit, particularly at all. It's totally different from the writing these days, where your pay depends entirely practically on credit, and certainly residuals depend on credit. I'll get to another story about that later on. David came in. It was David's first credit, I believe, actually. He'd written without credit previously, but he got a credit on this thing, which was absolutely fine with me. Written by both of us, and he certainly deserved every bit of credit. The movie is still considered a super classic of its time. At the time, it didn't make any splash. I mean, it was a good spy movie. But I can't tell you how often people come and you read it in print and things that this movie sort of changed spy movies. This was the first movie in which the CIA was your enemy. It was the first movie, really, which all movies are now, in which the people you work for are secretly trying to kill you. And it was a watershed, not because of what I did, but I still get calls from time to time. That and Parallax View, which I'll get to in a moment. That and Parallax View were the great conspiracy theory movies of the 70s. And I will get calls from a newspaper and from the Guardian in England or something saying, we're doing a thing on conspiracy movies. Naturally, you're the person we come to. And I'd always tell them, which is true. I say, I do not believe in any conspiracies at all. I think they're total bullshit. Total. I mean, they're wackos that have them. And but I said that enables me to write them, because I'm not sucked in by these, to me, imbecilic stories. Because I mean, these plans that to go too far, I don't want to get started on that. But I consider them, good stories to write. And anyway, so that one came, and not went, but that one came. And then later on, on the same way, another book called The Parallax View that came about the same way. It's a book. I wrote a script. I think Ziggy made some kind of deal with somebody for a small amount. I don't remember exactly the truth. There are a lot of things I don't remember accurately. But anyway, I wrote the script. Now we switch. We cut to an airplane going to Paris, first class. And Alan Pakula is sitting in a seat. And behind him is a Frenchman named Robert Dorfman. And Alan says to the person next to him, I'm reading the first script I've ever read, first draft I've ever read that's ready to shoot without changing a word. So the Frenchman tapped him on his shoulder and said, excuse me, who's that script by? And, Alan turned around and said, it was something called Lorenzo Semple. So he said, thank you. His name was Robert Dorfman. And he had bought Papillon, which was a huge international world bestseller at the time. Dorfman was faced with going to jail, I might say. He was very French. I say criminal producer, not quite, but he had he'd raised money for the movie around the world, promising Steve McQueen, and Steve McQueen hadn't said he'd do it. So in other words, Dorfman was in serious trouble if he didn't get Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen had totally rejected the script that he'd been given. And so Dorfman was desperate for another script. So I was hired to write that script. I wrote a script. And I quit working on, I guess it was Parallax. That's right, yeah. And I wasn't really working on it. It hadn't been set up yet or anything. But I worked on Papillon for a while. And I was getting, again, which was incredible in those times, I was getting paid $10,000 a week to work on it, to be paid in cash, which is very exciting, because nobody trusted Dorfman. And And it went on and on and on. And we went on location looking in Jamaica and things. And but in the course of before that, Steve, as I say, Steve had promised. Steve had been promised to everybody, but he hadn't agreed to do it. So we had a meeting in Freddie Field's office. Freddie Fields was the head of, I guess, what is ICM now? I've forgotten what it was. MCA? No.
GAC, I think.
Hmm?
GAC, I think.
No, it wasn't a G, but anyway, it was M's and A's and C's. But anyway, you couldn't anagram them. It was a big agency then. And we have a meeting in Freddie Field's office of Frank Schaffner, incidentally, who had come aboard as director. Also a very close personal friend of mine, as it happened. I think he was responsible for me staying on the script. And McQueen. And Steve, anyway, we sat there. And Steve was late. And then we started getting phone reports. Like, Mr. McQueen has crossed Doheny. Well, right, Mr. McQueen we got these up-to-date intelligence reports where he was. Then Mr. McQueen is in the building. And then there was another long wait. And finally, when Mr. McQueen came down, and he came in the office and he had an attaché case he said, excuse me, he opened it with sandwiches and God knows what in it, pills or something anyway. And then he said, I want to ask you guys one question. Do you want to make this movie? And of course, it's because Dorfman was faced with jail, everybody. And there was consternation. And he said, I don't want to make the movie, really. I don't want to make a movie. I'm happy. He was just starting his famous affair with, what's her name? You know who? Oh, God.
Ally McGraw.
Ally McGraw, thank you. He was just starting his famous affair with Ally McGraw. And he said, I'm much happier riding a bike around the desert with my kids. I don't want to make a movie. And also said, my friends in the CIA tell me it's too dangerous to go to Jamaica. So I'm not going to do this movie. Absolute consternation. And I remember Freddie turned to me and said, you tell him, Lorenzo. I'm so scared to death being in the room with these powerful people. And anyway, we got nowhere. Steve kept eating his sandwiches and saying, I don't think I want to do this movie. And anyway, so Frank, who was very good, Frank Schaffner, said, let's walk out. He said to me, let's go. This is ridiculous. So Frank and I walked out, and Dorfman stayed behind. And Frank and I listened at the door, and Dorfman gave one of the great speeches I've ever heard. He was very French, and he appealed to Steve McQueen for his artist, as an artist. He said, as an artist, there are many important artists around the world who have dedicated themselves to this movie, to this film, who are counting on you, who blah, 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 but all about art. And, it shocks me that you're not a serious artist, which disappoints me. And McQueen said, okay, I'll do the movie. And so it was done. It was done. But as the time went on, I was getting a little stale on it anyway. But also they wanted, so the excuse was that I was getting too expensive because nothing was happening, but I was being paid $10,000 a week during the pre-production. I wasn't writing or anything, just hanging around. So anyway, so I was dispensed with. And I brought in Dalton Trumbo, who was, a big name, good writer. Although actually, we had a few problems later on. And he did, again, I've never worked on a movie that, maybe one exception, no, never worked on a movie that wasn't improved by a subsequent writer. I mean, I never felt work was ruined. I felt actually I had done more than they had on it. But I mean, what they did was helped it. Varying degree, I don't know. But anyway, so that got made. I have to jump ahead on one thing, that when the Dalton Trumbo, first of all, he wanted sole credit on it. Absolutely insane, because I mean, I had taken this 700-page book and written it and gotten everybody to agree to do it, blah, blah, blah. And so Dalton, then anyway, he said, no, you're right. I never talked to him. I got this secondhand. All right, you're right. You can get second credit on the thing. And then he kept writing me these letters. Why? He's a famous letter writer. You mean I'm famous? That was his thing, writing letters. And so I kept getting these letters explaining why I should, first of all, why I shouldn't get any credit, then why I might get some credit, but then why I just barely deserve second credit. I never answered any of the letters. I didn't care, to tell you the truth. Afterwards, people have told me that if I had held out for it, I certainly would have gotten first credit. if I'd demanded it. And yeah, I could have gotten sole credit. But anyway, that's the way it came down. And as I said, he definitely improved the movie, especially in Dustin Hoffman's part, because Hoffman came aboard just about the time that I quit, or I was fired. And I don't know what more to say about that. But that was, I went from that back to the parallax view. And again, this is the movie that Alan Pakula now is going to direct it. This is the script that he didn't want changed. They wanted it radically changed, he and Warren Beatty. The hero of my version of it was a baseball player. In the movie, as those who've seen it remember, he was an investigative reporter who solved the Kennedy assassination. My hero was a baseball player, and the point of the book was that there was no conspiracy. This was a slight change. I'm like, I could actually, I've often thought of it, I could write a script based on a book in my first script, which I could sell again if I had the energy without anybody knowing it was the parallax view even. Well, there were some big set pieces were the same. Taking the pieces I took verbatim from the book, which there were a lot of them, and which Alan and people subsequently took credit for, I might say. There was a famous montage sequence, which I just copied from the book. And Alan always described how he thought of that up and whatnot. But anyway, that's the way the business goes. It amused me more than anything else. I mean, just because I really didn't care about credits that way. And so I did that. And again, then a writer's strike came up. And David Giler had been brought in this time to work on the script. Another very good writer. And David was working on it. And during the strike, there were rumors that somebody else was working on the script. And certainly Beatty was working on it himself and all kinds of people. And Giler had a big fight even with somebody in a restaurant, accusing them of scabbing on that script. But anyway, famously the script got done. And then when it came time for arbitration again, I guess David called me or I called him. And basically we said, none of us knows who really wrote this script. So let us just split credit on it. And we did. I mean, that was fine with me. And a more amusing and interesting story came up later on Never Say Never Again, a pseudo-Bond movie, Connery's last stand. We lured him back. I wrote a treatment for Jack Schwartzman, the producer. We lured him back, and he agreed to do it. I flew over to Spain, to Marbella, where he lived, and I told him the story and treatment. He said, okay, I'll do it. Then we come back, and then everything goes fine. We moved to, Irv Kirshner comes aboard as all these people are dead. I can't slander them. I mean, I can't legally slander them. I can say anything I want, but they can't sue me. But Kirsch came aboard, very unlikely director, but because he'd been originally known for small, sensitive movies, and then by some incredible thing, he got The Empire Strikes Back, which made him a totally different kind of big director for big movies. And we're in England doing pre-production, and Jack is running out of money. Don't have enough money to do a really big production. So they tell me, cut the script out. I mean, cut out these big numbers, some of these big numbers. So I'm sitting there in London with Kirsch. I cut out these numbers. They send the script then to Sean Connery. And he, of course, says, this isn't the movie I signed to do. I'm not doing it. It's ridiculous. You know, this isn't the movie that I signed. And so what do? They fire me, which is the correct response. I always believe when a movie goes really wrong, it needs a blood sacrifice. It's got to be a blood sacrifice to keep the others working and feel that we're going to live. The others are dead. We're going to live and we're going to go on and triumph. And the writer's the only person logically who can be fired. And because you can't fire the director unless you want to really start the movie again. The producer's not going to fire himself, so the writer goes. And everybody else feels wonderful about it. So anyway, so I had no more connection with it then. The movie gets made. And again, they hire a very good English pair, Dick Clement, and I've forgotten who the collaborator was.
Ian Lafreniere.
Lafreniere, thank you. Very, very good writers. They work on it. They do a very good job, as far as I know. And also everybody's writing a little bit on it. Certainly Sean is writing on it, and Kurt, everybody's fiddling around with it. And so anyway, so the movie gets made. And then it's out of my hands, totally. And then I heard, amazingly, somebody said, a funny thing, none of these other writers had a guild contract until the movie was finished. They hadn't signed a guild contract. I said, oh, that's very interesting. Somebody said, you ought to. So I took the position. Somebody said, listen, what you do, say that all writing belongs to you until another guy signs a guild contract. So everything that Frenet wrote, everything everybody else wrote is yours for credit purposes. I thought that's pretty outrageous. But anyway, so I wrote a letter to the guild from the arbitration saying that I wanted sole credit. And I said, this is very unfair. If I were the other guys, I'd be outraged. But I said, I owe it to all writers. I owe it to writers in the future to stand up for the guild and for the contract. I mean, it's just totally hypocritical, to tell you the truth. And I got sole credit on this extremely legal, technical basis. Wow. I mean, they were outraged. There were 2 appeals. But in other words, their material was not even considered because of this pretty technical thing. And I mean, Mike Franklin actually suggested it to me, then executive director of the guild. We were close. I'd been treasurer of the guild, so I knew the thing. But and then just to show again the things, I got sole credit. And then they owed me a payment of $100,000 if I got sole credit. Mm-hmm. When it came time to pay that, they refused to pay because the movie had been taken over by Fireman's Fund, by the completion bond people. Mm-hmm. And very interestingly, I was told, the completion bond people, for those who don't know what it is, that you get an insurance policy that the movie will be finished, that every movie has to have one or it can't start shooting. And the completion bond people promise the movie will be finished. They'll finance it out of their pocket to finish the movie, but they have control of it. They can fire the star, they can do anything. They can cut the production, but they will see that a negative is delivered. And they said anyway that our only obligation is deliver a negative. Once the negative is delivered, we don't owe anybody anything. They said if you had demanded the money 3 weeks earlier, we'd have had to pay you. And so anyways, that was a blow. But so anyway, again, I held out. I said we asked for the money through the guild, and we threatened, as I say, this is all out of school, but we threatened to put Jack on the strike list if he didn't pay up. This wasn't really. It was a borderline thing whether we could. We being the guild and me. And so we heard to our shock that Jack had engaged a very good lawyer, a very tough lawyer who we knew because he'd beaten us many times, and said, "Oh, there goes my bonus." And incredibly, about 3 weeks later, this lawyer called up and said, "We want to settle." And he said, "What is the settlement?" They said, "We'll pay the $100,000, but no interest." And that I kind of accepted. But so there were these very strange wrinkles in all movies, at least all the ones I've been involved with. I mean, the movie again that when I say my most famous, is Pretty Poison. It was a cult movie that it won the New York Critics Award for the best screenplay of its year. It's won many things. It's shown at retrospectives. It's a cult film with Tony Perkins and Tuesday Weld. It's very prized by. I don't think it's that great a movie, but it's considered very, very good. And in that movie, on the first day's rehearsal, we shot it in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, and we had rehearsal. We all flew there, and Larry Terman was the producer. He bought the book. He was fresh off The Graduate, I might say, and again, he was a very good social friend of mine. And the first day's rehearsal, to the director, I'll just call him D. I don't want to slander anybody. But D, anyway, standing for director. And start reading the script. And the first line that Tuesday reads is some very blank line, like, "Will you go to the door, please?" And she reads it, I don't know, "I'm going to," instead of saying, "Let's go to the door," she said, "I'm going to the door." And Dee stops her, the director stops her, and says, no, that's not the line. The line is, I'm going to the door. And she says, do you mean I have to read every line the way it's written? And Dee says, yes, you do. She said, that's it for me. Tuesday said, goodbye. And she walked off the movie. And so there we are stuck in Great Barrington with the whole crew ready to shoot, you know. And it took endless negotiation with Larry Turin had to come out there, everything. And I don't know what was going on. There was a rumor, you know, there was a rumor that a boyfriend of hers was going to take over shooting, a French boyfriend. I don't know what. These are all just rumors. It happens in a case like that, but we were just stranded there. And finally, anyway, it was agreed that she and Dee, the director, would meet and discuss it. That took days. They finally picked a certain tree on the lawn up there at the Great Barrington Inn. They would meet at that tree. They wouldn't meet too near her place or his place. But anyway, it was agreed. They met and said, okay, I'll do the movie. And Dee said, you know, maybe Flower to improvise a little bit, and the movie got made. But this is the kind of thing that happened on movies that to me, that's the real reason. To me, that's the fun of writing, a great deal of fun of writing. I mean, I enjoy these movies, these experiences that most people, it's not that I'm superior, I'm afraid it's that I'm inferior, that I have perhaps not enough pride in the work. To me, they're funny adventures rather than they don't break my heart or say, oh, I can never work again. To me, it's what goes with the movie trade. And not always this way, but you've got to look on it. You really must look on it as an adventure, as every movie as an adventure. I wrote a couple of movies for Dino De Laurentiis, and many of horrible messes of one kind or another. And Dino would say to me, I was very close to him at the time, Dino would say, Lorenzo, remember, every movie start, every movie end. So in other words, don't kill yourself worrying about it. This movie will end too. The shooting will end. And I mean, that's a basic attitude. And again, Dino had an attitude towards scripts it's a very interesting attitude. Everything I wrote from Dino's English was not nearly as bad as he pretended to be. He really understood it very well, even though not as well as Italian. But he had every script translated into Italian immediately. And his translator was not a very good translator. She came and visited me. She came and visited me in Nantucket, where I was staying with a family. And the first thing that the dog came into the room, you know, living room we were sitting, and the translator, who I'll call T, said, "Oh, what a lovely cat." And my wife said, "My God, you're the one who translates Lorenzo's scripts?" And she wasn't that bad, but I was told by a good friend that she really spoke really bad Italian. I mean, she was a street type of Italian. She was not classy Italian at all. And Dino said, he very honestly, which I liked, and he said, "Lorenzo, I don't want to be fooled by words. I want to know the story. I want to know what happens on the page. And so I don't want to be fooled by nice writing. I want to know the story." And it's very interesting. There is a lot to be said for that, in my opinion. Story is the most important thing and the hardest thing. The hardest thing. If the story is right and the casting is right, I don't care who directs it. If that determines the movie. And so you really want to know. Again, in writing, you should always, if you're right, you should quit for the day when you know the next page or the next 2 pages in your head. So, and then I always start and say by retyping the last 2 or 3 pages just to get a running start. Otherwise, you'll get stuck. And so if you know the next story point, it's enormously helpful. In fact, to me, imperative. I've written more other movies than the ones that I've just mentioned. I say with my heaviest credits, I mean, like CONDOR and Parallax. There were other movies scattered around there. All of them, again, had interesting points in that they were stories and fun. There's a movie called Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, which was, that was a comic strip, I believe. There'd been a script of it already and it hadn't worked. I was called in to rewrite it by John Gillerman, English director, who's a very close friend of mine still. I love him. Sheena, anyway, was a bit controversial in the sense that a beautiful white blonde girl she was a real hot Hollywood cookie, came over, and they immediately made her their queen. And she could talk to animals was her thing. And but the animals in it, she wrote a zebra. That was her particular trademark. And the zebra and all the other animals, incredibly, we shot it in Kenya. And the zebras, the animals were flown from L.A. to Canada. They came from the valley here in L.A. from an animal farm, trained. They were trained animals who were flown over because they could do their thing. The movie was unbelievably expensive for what it was, but it had been Columbia Pictures that made it. Columbia was owned by Coca-Cola at the time, and so they had a lot of blocked funds. Coca-Cola money they had in Kenya they couldn't get out because the currency wasn't convertible. So the idea was they'd put the money into the movie, and then make the profit from the movie would affect laundering their money legally and correctly. So they didn't care much how much they spent, but it was terribly extravagant, flying animals over that usually didn't work when they got there anyway. And especially the climactic scene was very difficult. Sheena was in an airplane being taken by the villain who was going to drop her out of the airplane. But as always in those movies, he never does it. He talks about it. If he dropped her, actually, when he talked, instead of talking about dropping her, he would have come to a happier end. But anyway, while she's talking, she calls a bunch of flamingos who come and attack the airplane in flight and get into the cabin and throw the villain out. And so, I mean, that in a sense, to me, is enough making the movie worth making. But strangely enough, the movie, it's one of the few movies I get residuals from, steadily, royalties from. And I know it's my daughter was over and doing a safari in Kenya 10, 15 years ago. And the movie, she mentioned that, and they said, oh my God, it's one of the most popular movies in Kenya still. And so that was that one. Now,
did that beget the series, or was the series on in the 60s?
The series was earlier than these movies almost always followed. I can't think myself. There's certainly no movie that was followed by a comic book series. It's the other way around. It's the other way around. Now, Flash Gordon, Dino had always wanted to make Flash Gordon because he loved the comic book, and it was Flash Gordon was a big hero in Italy. It was a big selling comic book and TV thing and everything like that. And he'd had a couple of scripts by very superior writers, I might say, that hadn't worked out. I can't remember the name, English writers. So anyway, we were down in Bora Bora making Hurricane. Not a great movie. In fact, not at all a great movie. But anyway, so Flash Gordon came up, and in those days, the way that I worked with Dino, he really was one of a kind. He did not need anybody approval to make a movie. He greenlighted it himself. He didn't have to raise the money. He had the money. And he would say, let's make when King Kong came up, which I'll get to, another one I wrote, the 1987 King Kong, which I think it's the only movie I've ever worked on that was unfairly treated by critics, I think. It's definitely better than the more recent King Kong. And a number of people now say of the remakes is the best one. But at the time, it's a losing game remaking a classic. There was an article in Time magazine. Dino mentioned we were on the front cover of Time during production, and they said, they were saying it was going to be a huge hit, and they said in so many words, the hero of the story is Lorenzo Semple, who's written a brilliant script. And that, when the movie came out, everybody descended on it. People said, oh, it's not up to the original, which, as you know, was done with clay animation and stuff, and even people who who'd never seen the original, didn't remember it all, piled onto it. But again, when I was sitting we lived in Aspen, Colorado. I lived there for 20 years. Because a writer's meant to be able to work anywhere he wants. That's the theory of it. Important part of being a writer. That's why we moved to Colorado. Why not? And good place to bring up the kids and everything. But Dino called me up one day. I remember I was sitting there, and he said, Lorenzo, what do you think? Will you make King Kong? I said, good idea. He said, okay, we make King Kong. I said, I'll write it. And I said, are we going to use the trade towers or where's he going to fall off of? You know, he said, we use the trade towers. That was our only discussion. And I wrote the script. And there, you know, and there was a few discussions afterwards. But essentially nothing was really changed. John Gilman also directed that. And as I say, since we'd worked together on Sheena, you know, he and I understood each other. And it was just shot it. And movies were made, Dino's movies were made that way, which is writers will not run into again. I mean, if somebody who can just say, I'll make the movie. And I don't know, you know, we had this mysterious financing. Again, I think there was some money laundering involved in it. People put up money that they wanted to get it made legal. And so that's, anyway, that's not, I don't know, nobody knows. But anyway, Dino had the money. And then he'd go to a studio. Paramount generally distributed his movies. But I mean, he gave Paramount the movie and they distributed it. They didn't have to put up production money. And then also there was a movie called Marriage of a Young Stockbroker, which actually, it was written by Charles Webb, who wrote The Graduate. Larry Terman, who produced The Graduate, produced this. He found the book. It's a little book. And actually Webb had intended it, in a sense, without saying so, it's a sequel to The Graduate. The Graduate ends, many people misunderstood it. It's a wonderful movie, particularly Mike Nichols' direction of it and everything. And it's perfect. It's a perfect little movie for what it is. And a lot of people consider the end of it a happy ending, generally, because in other words, Dustin Hoffman rushed up, stopped Catherine Ross marrying the other guy, and they jumped on the bus and went off together. Well, it was not considered a happy ending by Mike Nichols and those people. Because the last shot of the movie is a wonderful shot, which, as I recall it, just the two of them sitting there in the back seat of the bus, staring blankly ahead. No idea what's going to become of them. None. And that's the end of the movie. And so that actually, it's a very, very ambiguous ending. Now, in Stockbroker, it's possible to look on it as this is what's happened to Benjamin 20 years later, or 10 years later. He's married to a beautiful girl, and he's totally has nothing to do in life, because he knew what he didn't want to do, but he didn't know what he wanted to do. And going back to The Graduate. And so he hasn't done anything. He's become a voyeur, which is what's happened, which did not help sell the movie. It doesn't work. It's not nice. It didn't work. But anyway, so that movie was made. Larry Terman directed it. He decided he wanted to direct it, so he directed it. He did a good job at the movie. The casting was not right. Not that excellent actors. Dick Benjamin, a very good actor, and Joanna Shimkus, who most people don't even know her name now. She played the girl. She's a gorgeous girl, model, English. She'd been in one good movie before, which she cast her from, a D.H. Lawrence movie made in England. But she was about to marry Sidney Poitier, which she did, and they've lived extremely happily ever after, I might say. And so her mind wasn't totally on the movie. And she said during the course, she never wanted to make a movie again. And so there was not super chemistry and thing between the pair. For whatever reason, the movie was shown at a retrospective kind of a couple of my movies, the Cinematheque out here in California, showed in Santa Monica 6 months or so ago. And we showed Stockbroker. And people liked it much more than they had originally, but still, people kept saying, if it had been done as a Woody Allen type movie, it would have been wonderful. In other words, it would have been done lighter, rather than the grim aspects of it, the tragedy of this guy becoming a voyeur. It would have been the silly part of it, which hadn't occurred to me. And actually, so that it just wasn't right. It was one of those things that wasn't right. It wasn't destined. There's a movie called The Drowning Pool, which had Paul Newman in it. And I think Joanna was in it too. Joanne Woodward.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, his wife Joanne was in it. This again was a movie gotten for me by my agent, and I got a writing job. Now there was a company. It wasn't called 4-Star, but 3 big stars. I think McQueen was one of them, Paul Newman the other, and there was a third one who formed a company to do their own movies. Freddie Fields, the same person, I talked about earlier, the big agent was behind it. And they still hadn't found a movie. Paul Newman owed them a movie. He had to make a movie for them, and he couldn't find anything he wanted. Or anyway, so sort of in desperation, they said, how about doing a movie called The Drowning Pool? It was a sequel to Harper, which had been a great success. It was by Ross MacDonald, the same writer. It was, adequate. It wasn't as good as Harper. But the first mistake that was made, Newman wanted, and Joanne particularly, wanted to shoot in New Orleans. Now, the movie's absolutely, if you know Harper and Ross MacDonald, who wrote it, his movie's absolutely generic to Connecticut, where he wrote them. The style of them is there. And so anyway, we wrote the script, and Newman said, I'll do it. And so, it was thrilling. But then again, the same thing came up. The director wanted to do it there. And I said, I'm not interested in rewriting it. I'm not going to rewrite it for New Orleans. It strikes me as silly, and I wasn't interested enough. I've always liked the writing more than the movie. I mean, I've very rarely, I said the other day, and I think it's true, I've never seen 3 Days of the Condor totally through in one sitting. Never. And it's almost hard to believe, but it's true.
Amazing.
I mean, I'm aware of what's not right, and I didn't write it all myself, so what? But I mean, I enjoyed the writing of it. And the same with Drowning Pool. So then Tracy Wynn came in and rewrote it. And I'm sure did a good job. The movie was not a great success. Well, actually, it plays all the time on television and things. In other words, a lot of these things, reruns of things depend on the star very often. They sell packages of Paul Newman movies. And Never Say Never Again, which I made a lot of money on residuals from, the Connery one sold because they sell Bond packages. And even though this was a pseudo-Bond, by a miracle it's included in the Bond package. I wasn't there for the Drowning Pool. I mean, I very rarely have been on the sets. Because one theory is that if a writer spends months writing something, or years, months, weeks, he's not likely to come up with something better in 10 seconds on the set. I really believe that. This sudden writing on the set is probably not necessarily very good. In England, in the theater as well, they believe not in a lot of rewriting in preparation and tryout. I just get the script set and do the best possible job you can with the script, which I think is generally a good thing. Not done in movies. I mean, the director and the actor and everybody want to, and I don't blame them, they want to do the best, but it doesn't always work that way. It doesn't always work that way, what they think. I mean, I think it's a disaster, directors taking over script writing. I think a catastrophe. The filmmakers, I have nothing but respect for, real filmmakers. And then Antonioni or somebody who actually, it's their thing from beginning to end. But somebody who's hired to direct and then calls it their movie after they've screwed it up, I have contempt, is the only word, for the possessory credit in a hired director. I think it's an outrage. But the directors are too powerful, and they're the gods. And so be it, so be it. Good directors can help, but I say again, I think I've said already, cast and script is 80% of a movie. People often mention or ask me about the fact that all my movies have been adaptations. I've never written an original, which is, as I say, it's cowardice on my part, partly. First place, I'd rather write a novel. Also, I run out of steam, run out of ideas. In other words, you can start very well. Larry Terman once said, I think it was, that it had an experience with originals. They're like the cartoons. The cat runs off the cliff, runs perfectly through the air, and he looks down and then crash. And originals are that way. You go fine until suddenly you say, how's this going to end? And crash, total crash. I never really, this is from never really having something, it's probably a corollary of never really having something to say, in the sense that I wanted to say something coherent. And also, again, I never wrote sufficient outlines that start off half-cocked. It's too easy to do. And then you suddenly get panicked halfway through or 3/4 of the way through, and just the whole thing falls apart. Now, in adaptation, obviously you know where you're heading. It's extremely comfortable. You see the good parts of it. You see the good parts of it immediately, and the most important thing in adaptation, as a working writer, discover why they bought the book or the play. What did they like in it? Right. They being the gods of the studio or the people who are paying you. Right. And see that you basically stick to that. I was once hired to do one of my very first or second television jobs. I was hired to do a rewrite of a script. I forget what it was, a television script, a half-hour television script at Universal, some series. And I changed it substantially. And I was told after, first of all, that the executive producer had written it under a pseudonym. And they did not want it changed. They just wanted, the smaller the changes you make, the better. You find exactly what they want changed and make it. Make them. But I've never written strong enough outlines. I'm impatient. I'm impatient. It's ridiculous. I've said I've seriously, again, I may be fooling myself. I wish I had started novel writing. And again, I'm not trying to put myself on a Hemingway thing, but I could certainly have written very good literary detective stories, say, or maybe some spy stories. Not as good as Le Carré, but stories. I think I could have. But a rule of mine was I wouldn't want to write a novel I didn't want to read. And I didn't want to read many novels. So I killed myself before starting by not daring to start them, which this applies to all young writers, everything. It is one of the worst things to do. Don't not write something because you're afraid you might not do it well. Do all the possible preparation you can in notes, preparing, but don't cut yourself off. Don't negotiate with yourself and lose. Many young writers start by writing because they go to film school or something. They write because film school actually looks down basically on writing. So all directors dominate film schools. When I was teaching, as I taught screenwriting at NYU, not in the film school, but in the Tisch School of the Arts and Dramatic Writing program. And I would tell people, they'd say, what should they do? Most of them would try to write a simple little movie. Horror movies, most people start with horror movies, many people do. Because people read them and they can get bought. They can get bought. You don't need a super track record, if you have a very good premise. But I just said, to get into business was the most important thing. I said, if you can get a job as a tour guide at Universal, it's the best help for you as a writer. Because you have to be inside the bank before you can rob it. And first thing is get inside the bank, and who knows? There are people around, and maybe you could stick a script in somebody's pocket while they're walking to lunch hour, and it's something happen. But you get the feeling of being in the business. I know it happens occasionally. Somebody sitting in a barber shop in Des Moines writes a script that's bought, and it's very, 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 very rare, and don't count on it. Again, keep coming back to the subject of how a writer starts a career, what makes him become a writer. I've said, I think if he wants to say something, it should definitely he should be a novelist or even become a journalist or become a politician. But if he wants to be a writer, I've read someone, I think it's true, every writer's career, and I'm including poets or everybody, at some moment they've been encouraged, quite early. It may be some girl at school that they hadn't been able to get anywhere with, and to write a story in the school paper, and she says, "Oh, gee, I like that story." There's some moment of encouragement. Somebody says, "Gee, that's good. You're good. You're going to be able to do this." I think it's vitally important. This you can't. Suppose you could hire a shill to come in and say, "Gee, you're great," but that probably wouldn't work. But the thing with these moments of encouragement, that is the decisive moment. Because otherwise, I don't think there is any. I constantly read people say they always knew they wanted to be a writer. I guess that's true, but I don't know what they mean by a writer. To what end? To have things not necessarily. I think underneath, a lot of them want to be rich and famous when they say that. George Bernard Shaw said, "Nobody but a fool ever wrote for anything but gold." But you know, he's famous for strong statements like that. And I think, as I said earlier, this thing of people want power. It gives you power. And being a successful writer is an attractive, you know, in all things. It gets you girls, you know, it gets you sex, power, all the things that some people say it's all about sex, you know. Everything, getting ahead and everything is want to have the power to get beautiful girls. Whether true or not, I don't know. But it's an arguable thing. That the image of, I think the image of a writer, and I really don't know, is that's when somebody says, I want to be a writer. There's something about the way of life of a writer. I can understand, again, in earlier days, it meant like being a reporter, like Ben Hecht or somebody on a newspaper in Chicago. That I totally can understand. That was a way of life. But I don't think there's much of a way of life of writers anymore, of a particular way of life. I mean, of being, writers generally now are not, either they make no money or they make an adequate amount of money. I mean, if they write articles and things, if they're established journalists, they get on. And, you know, writers live in decent places. So I don't know what they mean when they say, I want to be a writer. I think it's different for every person. I believe very much in regular hours for writing. I had an office always. I had an office that was, when I lived here, I drove to an office in Santa Monica. When I lived in Aspen, I walked a mile to the office every morning, and foolishly carrying a 15-pound rock in a backpack, trying to get in shape and lose weight. And it may have damaged my legs considerably. But I walked a mile there and a mile back. But I mean, and it was just the lack of, when you went there, you went to write. I'm a morning writer. If you can actually write 3 hours, occasionally 4 hours a day, that's a huge length of time to write without being totally worthless and exhausted after that. If you can write like from 10:30 to 1:30 or something, or 11 to 2, I cannot recommend that highly enough. Now, I know there are people who write at night, and I've never been a drug taker. Well, I drink, but can't believe you ever do one, when you're smashed with drinking, I can't believe you ever do one thing that's worthwhile. And again, there's this myth of the writer sitting up all night, bohemian writer, you know, drinking and a bottle of wine or something and writing. I find that impossible. Good luck to those who can do it, but it's impossible. Somebody, maybe Hemingway towards the end, wrote standing up. And I think this is an extremely interesting thing to try. To have a lectern, like a thing that a book goes on, and put your computer on it, and do it like a painter. Type something, and you can walk around and think a minute, and in effect look at it, and come back. And I find that, incidentally, an extremely appealing way. I've never done it at any length, but I think it's a wonderful thing, and I wish somebody would try it and tell me how it worked for them. As I say, it puts you, to me, the painting analogy is quite interesting. So you're more like a painter that goes up and does something, and then, you know, then walks away from it and thinks. And I think it's very physically attractive, the idea of walking up and tapping at something. But anyway, so I think, to say the physical, I do not really believe in particular chair, particular spot. I mean, I do believe that the idea, I do not believe you should have a great view. I mean, that's a famous distraction of a beautiful office with a wonderful view. It should be really 4 walls, kind of. You should be there to write. You don't get inspired by seeing the Rocky Mountains or anything. It is not constructive. You may think it is, but believe me, it ain't. I mentioned that I thought that 3 or 4 hours was about the end of a productive day. As we know, stable horses, when you rent a horse, when they get near the stable, they start running to get home there. And it's definitely that way with scripts. When you see the end in sight and know how it's going to go and are excited, you can work. I've worked 8 hours, but that's a very special privilege when you're almost finished, and and the stable is there. If at the moment when you're in the middle of it slogging around, you'll do stuff that you should never get to the point where you really don't know what's coming next, where you feel stuck. I think it's a serious problem when you get seriously stuck. I don't know whether we're talking about not writer's block, whatever that thing is, but I have nothing to say about that. I mean, I can understand you get very upset by some love affair or something. You don't want to work or something for a month, 2 months.
Right.
That's separate. Have nothing to do with that.
Right.
But the all important thing is not to get stuck in the script, to keep up your momentum somehow. As I said, I actually retype, literally rewrite the last couple of pages, sometimes 3 or 4 pages, which may be half of what you written the day before. It's very quick, and also you make improvements. You're constantly rewriting the script, making little improvements as you go through it each time. And I mean, if I'm going to say anything dogmatic and slightly original, I would recommend that you retype the last 3 pages you did. And as I say, it'll be fun doing it because you've already written it and say, gee, isn't this easy? Isn't this fun? Not realizing that you're just copying. But it really helps getting up that energy, getting up that momentum. Momentum is everything. And keep you happy. You have to enjoy writing. This idea of, I don't know. I mean, I've gotten stuck in that. I've had an incredible number of scripts I didn't finish for one reason or another, to tell you the truth. Lack of will. I mean, I've had some bad experience. People have been very mad at me because of jobs I took and didn't finish. I mean, it was very naughty of me. And once in a famous case, I say a famous case, I was writing an hour television thing for, let me say again, I'll say for a famous producer. It's of the times of the so-called golden age, with these hour and a half long things. And I sold him something. I sold him a good idea, but I had no idea. I just lost momentum, couldn't finish it. So I called him up. I'll call him Bill. That was not his name. I said, Bill, I'm stuck. I said, anybody else in Hollywood, I turn this script into. But I respect you so much, I'm going to throw it away. And he absolutely totally fell for it. And he went around saying, that's Lorenzo, he's so wonderful, he didn't want to give me a bad script. And I mean, it was outrageous. But, I mean, I've heard of other writers who did the equivalent of it. We come in with a script, actually a lot of them blank pages, and start to tear them out and say, I'm not going to give this to you. But I mean, I don't know how often that happens, but I think that getting stuck and being unable to finish assignments with some of you start will happen to people. And as I say, you've got to handle them fairly boldly, because people are going to be very down on you and upset, Especially, they want you to give back the money. You don't want to give back the money. That's the first step. You don't give back any money. That's one of the writer's axioms. Well, look, technically, I mean, I once was writing a script with somebody, and when it was a standard thing in those days for a first draft and a rewrite and a polish. That's what you contracted for. And we did the first and second drafts. There weren't any big problems. There was problems. We got to the polish, and we figured the project was never going to work. We didn't do the polish. We said, I'm not going to do the polish. So they then demanded, this was, I think it was Paramount, I can't remember, they demanded the money back for the first draft and the second draft. Because, in other words, the deal was contingent on doing those 3 parts of it. Which, just said, well, okay, fine, don't do the polish, but then you have to pay us back for what you paid you already. Wow. And we said, no, that's not our theory. And anyway, after a lot of talk from agent lawyers and people, we won to the extent that we didn't do the polish, we didn't pay them back, but we certainly didn't get hired ever again. We got a very bad reputation. I love the idea of one person walking around the room and one person doing the writing and sitting down, talking about it, and then write. One person writes and then you go over and rewrite it. The idea that one of you will write a section and the other one will write another section, I've tried that. And I don't know why I've collaborated, to tell you the truth, just from lack of will. Somebody else wanted to. I've never collaborated with somebody. I've never collaborated, it's terrible to say, with somebody who I thought was a better writer. And I've collaborated with somebody who I thought would help me in one way or another with a plot or something. I got to be wonderful to collaborate with somebody who's a really better writer. If you could do it, so to put them together. But the idea, again, of putting together how do you meld this thing? I mean, you're not one mind. It's very hard. And I know these teams work wonderfully. In these days, television is all collaborative. I mean, that's why they're all team writing, and in the famous writer's room, which never existed, in the famous writer's room, that's all total collaboration, and people grow off other people's ideas. I don't know how well you can do that to a feature. I don't know if it's ever been done a feature with a writer's room. Anybody who knows the answer, please write in. I mean, you might get 5 writers together. It's the idea that would horrify most, serious writers of people. The idea that you get 4 writers instead of hiring one after the other and firing one of them, hire them all together. Hire the entire team and have them work on it together.
Right.
It's a good idea. I think I'd love to be a member of a team like that.
But there's plenty of teams of writers that write features as much as television.
There definitely are. I would like to tell you the truth. I don't know how they work, and I mean, I don't know physically how they work, what their process is. And I think it's very important to know. There is a huge age thing in this town. I'm 88 years old now. I like to boast that I'm older, because then people say, "Oh my God, you can't be." I say I'm 92. They say, "Oh no, 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 no." I mean, that's just sheer conceit. But anyway, in fact, I'm 88, and so you don't get jobs. I don't look for jobs. I don't want jobs, as I said earlier. But nevertheless, somebody says you should do something, kind of. But anyway, I was at a dinner a while ago, a couple of years ago, and Marsha Nassiter, who had been my agent and my 40 years my friend for a long time, and we were arguing about something very loudly and argumentatively, and she was rolling her eyes at me and stuff. It was some basic thing. I was saying you didn't have to see a movie to talk about it. I said you can talk more honestly until you see the movie. But some argument, which I believe, incidentally, I'll discuss that in a moment. But anyway, it became loud, and somebody at the table said, "Jesus," he said, "Shut up, take that on the road." Now, they actually meant to shut up, not to disrupt the dinner, but we said maybe we should do that as a show. And then we thought of doing a television thing, a little television thing, just on, of which the two of us talk about movies and argue about them. Being, as I say, both over 80, we sort of say we bring 160 years of experience to this thing. We'll talk about movies. And so that's how Real Geezers came about. And we just decided to do it. We had a very nice girl, Heather Finnegan, who was an editor and post-production person. She shot it, so it just consists of having 2 cameras, and editing is the only work. And it is work, cutting it down, because, they're meant to be short. We never were able, we were written up very widely at the beginning. Newsweek had, everybody said, we were never able to sell the program. We didn't try very effectively. We never had, an agent wasn't interested because there's no money in it, no big money in it. And I'm sure, all we wanted was a 5-minute interstitial on something like the Real Network or something, or put on in 5 minutes before the beginning of some other program once a week. And we've been on. We were on the Today Show. We were on ABC, but as a segment of their news programs. And we never able to get somebody to take us for 5 minutes as a regular thing. Then we made a deal with something called, I've forgotten what it's called, Snap Films or something anyway. And they were going to sell us, they were going to sell ads for us. They were going to post it on, sell ads on Google, put it on YouTube, or put it on they have a website, put it on their thing. And they did actually sell a little bit. I think we got a check finally after a year or two for $140. But that, to me, I thought that was amazing. Marsha always wanted, honestly, hoped to make some money from it and have a real show. I thought, and if we do it again, it'll be on the basis of, we miss doing it. People come up all the time and say, are you still doing Real Geezers? It actually, I like to think it had a considerable impact on a very small number. When the small people who watched it really liked it. And it was fun. And so I always considered it was an entertainment show rather than a movie show. In other words, our opinions of the movies were much less important than, than how we talked about them and argued about them. It was fun watching this. I really believe it was. People would write in saying to me, or to Marshall, why do you let him get away with this? Because I browbeat her considerably. I mean, that was the format. I'd say that's stupid and things like that. That's right. And I would argue with her quite a lot because I seriously, I'd say we don't have to see this movie to review it. I mean, we read about it. We know what it is. And what's there to say about it? And the interesting thing about it is why it was made, where it fits into the kind of movies they're making these days, how it did at the box office. That's interesting. But saying, oh, gee, the editing looks very good. I mean, our opinion's no better than anybody else's. In the olden days, serious critics, theater and movies, were not allowed to have anything to do with people who made movies or plays. Nothing. They couldn't ever have a meal with them or anything, or they'd be disqualified. And so the more you know about movies, or the more you know about the movie makers, I think the less you're equipped to be a critic in the good sense. And I wanted to be a critic rather than a reviewer, which is always a basic thing. I don't want to say, like, 2 canes up or 3 canes down about a movie. I mean, let them. There's no reason why our taste is any better. But I do like to talk about movies, as I say, and where they fit in, why.